Hello. What? Okay. So hi, I'm Leah. And before I get started, I'd actually really love to get a sense of who's in the room, because a lot of what we're talking about today, I can kind of talk about it in a little bit different ways, depending on what the main interest points are for everybody here. So I want to get a sense of how many folks in here are students who are one day hoping to work in the games industry, or maybe doing a little bit right now? Great. Okay. And how many people here have like started their own company, either by themselves or with a group of people? Awesome. And then how many people here are working in more casual games? So I understand. And how many people are more console, other kind of, okay. So that's just a big old mix of everything. So we're going to talk about, I don't know, everything. I'm also going to try and leave a lot of time for question and answer at the end, because I find that, especially when you start talking about things like narrative, there's a lot of kind of individual questions, thoughts, ideas, and things. And so I want to try and leave at least 10 minutes or so that we can chat. So if you've got questions, save them up and we'll talk about them. So yeah, I'm Leah. I work at Microsoft Studios, and I work in narrative design. So mostly on now our core titles. Actually, just so you have a little bit on me, these are some of the major titles that I'm working on right now. Killer Instinct, which indeed, yes, has some story. Sunset Overdrive coming out fairly soon, and with our friends over in Finland, I'm working on Quantum Break with them, which is a really exciting narrative project. But I've only been at Microsoft for about 2 years. I actually came from the television industry, more specifically kids TV animation. And for about 10 years, I worked at Disney Channel, like working on, hey, what are the next shows going to be? And then overseeing them. And it's been interesting. So like some of those that the first one I worked on was one called Recess, which was fairly, oh, I see some recognition. I know how old you are. And then worked on Phineas and Ferb is probably the biggest hit right now. That was something that we developed and worked on. And some of these other ones. What was interesting is, while this seems really linear, my job there always entailed that once we decided to turn these into shows, you wound up, it's Disney. They turned it into everything. They turned it into bed sheets, they turned it into toys, they'd put it on a stage, they'd put it on ice, you know, because every company needs a capade. And so they would always come to me when they wanted to make a video game. And so I started working on video games largely as the story consultant for all of these things there. And then probably the coolest thing I've ever done is that then the people in Kim Possible, Kim Possible is doing so well that the folks at the theme parks came to me and said, you know what we'd really love to do is do this immersive experience in some of our theme parks where it's built in. And what they would do, and I don't know how familiar you are with the show, it's okay if you're not a big fan, but she has this phone that basically gives her all of her communication from everything. And you can go to a couple of the theme parks and get this phone given to you, and you can go around, say, an Epcot Center, and there will be pieces of the theme park that interact with you if you have the phone, and you're working through various storylines trying to help her thwart some of these villains. It's like being literally walking yourself through a video game. And once I did that, I was like, I need to do more of this, because this is awesome. And yeah, so I highly recommend it for all of you who have a spare theme park sitting around. Get involved with a project like that. Yeah, I will probably never get to do it again, but it was amazing. So then I got the call from Microsoft to come and be there, I was like, this is amazing, and I don't think I can ever go back to linear now that I've worked in interactive. But I will say, some of the things that surprised me when I got there is that Microsoft hired me to be their narrative person, or one of many narrative people. I guess I just took it for granted that that meant that all the video games that I was going to be working with wanted narrative, and you know, like understood what it was like, and were going to be accommodating to the fact that, hey, we need to put story in this, we want to do character development. And it's not always the case. I'd say it's interesting to me that there's so much that goes into video games, obviously, but narrative has been something that I feel is still fairly young in terms of what we can do in video games, and that's what we're going to talk about a lot today, because I feel like what's interesting is they did this survey last year, and they asked people, like these were all US participants, but they asked just a bunch of gamers of a whole list of things, which ones were most important to them in terms of their likability, their intent to purchase, all those kind of things. Story came up #1 across all categories, which I found was actually even surprising to me. It was more than gameplay mechanics, more than the art and look, more than whatever. It's not to say it came up #1 for every single person, but across the board, it was communally and collectively the biggest thing. So it feels like there is a lot of untapped potential, and we should really focus on this in the way that we focus on other things in games. For instance, I come into games coming from animation, and I'm looking at the art. We've done a really good job as a games industry, like making huge strides in art. Like, you know, this, I had some small amount of contact with Rise, but the fact that like combat looks like this, and when I started playing games, combat looked like that. And so, you know, they've made huge changes and huge strides in terms of taking it from something that was very basic and minimal and finding the right technology, finding the right artistic integrity, putting those all together. And in terms of looking at kind of the advancement, they're pretty far along when it comes to visuals. You know, you start at something like combat. I don't know, it's not quite at the bottom, slightly above Pong, maybe, I don't know. And then, you know, but I'd say we're probably fairly far along by the time that we're now on these new gen consoles. Now, there's still places to go, and I am so thankful that there are people out there who worry a lot about, you know, what kind of resolution we have, what sort of frame rates we've got, what kind of download speeds we have, and all of those kind of things. But in terms of the amount of effort that it's going to take us to move the needle to extra awesome, it takes a lot. Whereas I would argue that in story, we can actually make huge strides for not nearly as much effort because we haven't spent as much time as an industry diving into it. And so, yeah, because I still see a lot of themes that I saw back in some of those days. Like, for instance, you know, we still have a lot of games where you are like, oh, I'm the sole hope to save my planet from alien invaders. You know, that one's been around for a while. Or you've got the, oh, someone, you know, did something bad to someone I really care about, so I've got to go, you know, do something to help them. And my most, you know, probably my most favorite thing is the fact that we have a huge obsession now in video games with like, the undead are out there and they're coming for us, so we've got to get them first. Yeah, they didn't invent that. So we've, you know, these storylines. Now, granted, this is a bit of, obviously, a bit of this is joking because clearly we've come a long way in terms of how much we can tell about the stories. We've got more that we've sang about characters. Hey, we have dialogue. That was a, you know, that was a nice move forward. We've got cinematics. But I would actually suggest that a lot of those are things that we've borrowed from other industries and other entertainment platforms. And there's a lot that we can do to come up with narrative that's more immersive, that gets us away from just, hey, you play a lot of game, and then you go to a cutscene that a lot of people I know skip through. You know, and it makes me sad because we spend a lot of time on those cutscenes. But what it says to me is that the people who are playing the games actually aren't so interested in the cutscene. They would love to have more of the story coming at them while they're actually playing the game. And that makes a lot of sense. And that's what I feel really is what, when we start talking about what next-gen storytelling can be, it's immersing it a lot more into the actual gameplay experience and using all the tools that you have at your disposal to actually make a good story. Because I think on video game, if we were to look compared to, you know, if art's up there always, I would actually argue that game story is only about there. And what you can take away from this, though, is that we still have a lot of awesomeness to find, and we can get a lot of it for actually not a tremendous amount of effort still. We're still going up our diminishing returns curve on narrative. All right. Here's the other thing, is that moving the dot absolutely takes collective resources of the entire games industry. Because there wasn't one person out there who took us from 8-bit tanks to, next-gen graphics that we have right now. It happens over time, and it takes every studio sort of making their own advancements here and there. And it's great when we can then borrow from things that have done it really well. So what I do want to say is that if you came here hoping that I was going to talk about a lot of, the core elements of good story and what it takes to write great characters and all that kind of thing, that's not what we're going to be talking about today. It is absolutely true that stories about character, don't forget it, make sure that that's always woven into what you do. But in the, half an hour that I still have left to talk to you, we're not going to dive into and make you all like amazingly well-versed storytellers if you weren't before. What I do want to talk about today is the fact that story is about character, but making a great story is about people. And by that, I mean all the people in this room. Okay, so the people who make it, who make the stories, are what we really need to be focusing on. How many of you went to Marty's talk yesterday where he talked a lot about, you have your goose. He had that delightful animation with the goose and the golden egg and it was very next gen. But that really is the core of how we're gonna make this better. But there's some specific ways in what we can do. So here's something to make sure you believe in, is that a good story is never, ever, ever, ever about the idea. I can't tell you how many times people came into my office when I was working at Disney and pitched me an idea, and I had heard that same idea 25 times. What I always would buy into is if I believed in that person's ability to execute on it, I knew that it was going to be a better idea, because excellent story is the result of excellent execution, and those are the people and the minds and all the collective resources that we bring to a project that's going to make something great. So, I'm giving you a few steps as we're going to talk through this. I actually decided to start with step 0. I had a step 1 as I was putting this together. I was like, oh. Before we even start there, we need to make sure that as you're working at on your project, you need to believe that story is critical. You need to believe it intrinsically that story is critical. And you know what? It's not for every game, and that's okay. There's a lot of games out there that don't really need a lot of story. I play Words with Friends. I'm okay that there's not a story in that. There's sort of a story that I create with my friend as I beat them handily every single time. No, I don't. I would like to, but there's no need for it. There's a lot of games out there that are even more complex that don't really need it. But so you always want to ask, does your game need story? Okay, and you may say, yeah, no, and then I would say, oh, are you sure? Are you sure that it may not, or it may? I don't know. I am also a huge fan, and I did not know that it came from this region. I'm a huge fan of Ruzzle. I play that like as my go-to-bed-at-night kind of game, and they just came out with Ruzzle Adventures, I found out while I was here. Hey, they started to create a story around this. And I was like, oh, this is fun. There are characters. There's stuff I can do. I can help them move to different places because of the ways that I can put letters together on a board and find things that happen. Okay. And what that does for it, though, is absolutely creates more merchandising potential, more stickiness with the audience. And so before you just dismiss outright the need for story in your game, I'd think about it, because there are a lot of really big benefits. Remember, it was the #1 reason that people chose to buy games and play games. And the other thing is, are you honestly willing to make it a priority? And this is, I think, where it breaks down a lot. I will have numerous conversations early on in a production with, the producers and the designers and the EPs and creative directors, and they're all like, yes, this is going to be such a important story game. And then 1 year later, when it comes time to, cut things back and, do all that we all know happens on things, story tends to go away fairly quickly, So you need to make sure that you're willing to make it a priority. Really, really make it a priority. So this is the stuff you just need to do before we start talking about it all, because understanding, believing intrinsically that it's important is going to be key. Then, okay. Here's the big thing. I said before, it's all about people. It's about hiring the right people. It's about becoming the right person, if it's you. It's about bolstering your teammates up to make sure that you've got the right people there. And for a narrative-heavy game, it is critical, actually for any game. Here's one thing that's critical for any game. Creative vision holder. Okay, I think this has come up on various talks. It's like, there's someone who's got to have a vision. And I have worked on various projects in many media where there isn't a person who's holding the ultimate vision for what that project should be, right? I think we've probably all seen some of that. And it never turns out to be a very good project. You can see it coming from the very beginning when someone doesn't know what they want it to be, when someone's feeling a little wishy-washy about it, or like, oh yeah, well, it's this, but it's that. And you're like, those two things don't really go together so well, but you know. And sometimes what they try and do is spread it around, 8 different people. Well, this is the creative vision holder for art. And this is the creative vision holder for UI. And this is the creative vision holder for audio. You're like, that's nice and all, but are those people talking to one another? You need someone to bring that all together. Okay, specifically on a narrative-heavy game, you are going to need a head of story. And I would argue in many cases, if narrative is really one of the key pillars, those two people might be the same thing. Okay, it may very well be the case that your head of story is your creative vision holder. What your head of story has to do, and this is something that I find doesn't always come out. They may be really excellent writers. They may be able to put a script together. They may be able to pull off excellent dialogue, give you a sense of cutscenes with a story flow that works. But the biggest thing about your head of story is that they need to be interacting with the full team. They need to collaborate with every discipline that's on there. They absolutely need to communicate their vision, make sure other people's visions are coming through. They're going to need to mentor sometimes other people on their team. And it may be that they've got other writers that they're working with, and they need to get them up to speed. But also, and I think this one's really often overlooked, you want to mentor people who are in other disciplines about how they can become better storytellers. And we'll get to that a little bit later, but that's going to be a huge part of it. And then, of course, they need to execute. And execute sort of means a couple different things. They need to make sure that everything goes through. Okay, but they also need to be responsible for making sure that they've hired the right people. Okay, because this is one of those things where I way too often have seen in video games that there'll be people at a developer who maybe came in and this is their 3rd game and they've sort of steadily been rising up doing various things. And so on this game, they're going to give them the chance to be the writer, sometimes even the lead writer. Okay, and a lot of times those folks, hey, yeah, they've written maybe some level design scripts, they've done some other things, but I've never seen a production where someone had been on a couple things, and maybe they'd done some level design and they'd done some producing before, and now all of a sudden we're going to make them one of our key artists. People are like, oh, well, no, they can't. No, I don't know. Do we know they can draw? They can't do it. They don't have the right tutelage for this. For some reason, people think that everyone can be a master storyteller. And it may be the case that that person's been working their way up through that company for the last 5 years, and they've been honing their craft and writing a ton of scripts on the side. They've been part of writers' workshops, and they've been making this huge effort to become a really great writer, along with understanding how the game industry works and all of that, and they could be a great resource. But it's not just one of those positions you want to dole out to someone simply because they've been around for enough time. Okay, so, and then just keep in mind, the reason you want awesome people is because it begets awesome products. It begets more awesome people. When you have better people to mentor, you want to make sure that you're, taking advantage of that by having the right person in those key leadership roles. All right, so that's the start. This local project is, I think, a really good example of something where you had your creative vision holder and you had your head of story clearly the same person. Okay, I mean, this project is this is about as good as story in video games gets right now, in my own opinion. Like, you guys may disagree, but what I love about it, and we're going to dive into this in a little bit, it took so many things into consideration. The art, the sound design, the controls. I mean, I love the fact that, like most gamers, my left thumb is more adept at moving things around than my right thumb, okay? So you had a big brother who was more capable of doing stuff, who was controlled by the left thumb, and you had a little brother, not so good, who was controlled by, yeah, I'd wander around a little bit more with him. right? That's as it should be. But that was smart, and that was storytelling through your thumbs, okay? Because that vision holder had a really great, sense of what they wanted this to be, and they could communicate it to all the people who were executing on those various pieces. All right. The other thing, involve your entire team. And this is important because I know not everyone in this room is necessarily someone who they say, oh yeah, I'm a writer, I'm a narrative person, I'm a storyteller. But everyone on the team is a storyteller. And that's so key to understand. Your audio person, your art person, your UI person, your designer, your tech person. Everyone should be contributing towards the story. And that right there is when you're going to start to get more immersive, next-gen kind of storytelling. Because I can't tell you how many times I've tried to say this to people and convince them of this, so I may or may not be successful in convincing you of this right now. But story is so much more than the words that someone writes on a script. It's so much more than the dialogue that's said or the things that are in a cutscene. You tell story with the colors you choose and the funny hat you put on the guy and the scenery that they're in and the sound effects and the casting. Okay, all of that, the thumb that you use, tells story. And so you want to make sure that everyone on your team thinks of themselves that way and that they're involved in the process. And that's why, again, it's so important to have the right head of story and the right creative vision holder who's going to make sure to put that out there. This will allow you to solve problems creatively and from many different ways, okay? Because there's a lot of things that come up as problems, but when we're just thinking more from linear storytelling skill sets and tools, you're going to miss an opportunity for us to really start to make those breakthroughs into what video game storytelling can be, okay? Because your programmer might have a really good idea about something that they can do to be able to, solve your story problem. The people who are creating what guns your character is, toting around, those guns should say something about your character. Okay, that main character shouldn't have the same gun that every other main character in every other game has, right? And it's really important, okay, back to the whole goose and golden egg, treat the goose nicely, because people who are in other disciplines, you want to make sure that you are treating their disciplines with curiosity and respect. You may be a story person, okay, but if you go to the audio person and think, oh, audio is something that happens at the end of the game, and so when we'll hand it over to them and they'll score it and do all the sound effects, why do you think that that person's going to have any respect for the fact that we need to start talking about narrative really early on in the process? We need to get art to be really integrated into the discussion early on. All right, so this is a discussion I probably had with, I don't know. I can't even count the number of people who I come in and I'm like, story. Hey, you know what? Where I come from, I always thought stories were fun. And story, they're entertaining. There's a lot of stuff that, somehow in video games, that is not the discussion that happens often. Sometimes they think it's like this. And you're like, okay, why do these two need to compete? The number of times I've heard somebody say something like, yeah, we're a story game, but the biggest goal is fun. And so fun trumps everything. Fun is always going to rule out. I'm like, if your story and your fun are in conflict, you are doing it wrong. Hands down. And that's where it comes down to needing the creative solutions to these things, because the right story will enhance your fun. And if something about your story is getting in the way of fun, like, your cutscenes are all 3 minutes long and no one wants to sit through them and they want to move on, then get rid of the damn cutscenes. Like, figure out a way to not do that. Because everything about the experience should actually be really integrated to one another. Okay. I actually went to this is actually a more casual game, but went to one of our productions and just had them list out, okay, if you just off the top of your head, give me like 10 of your things and what order you would prioritize them in. This was the order that this EP gave them to me in for a very particular type of game. These would change around regardless. But the fact that he could actually give me that order, and then I was asking him where a story would go in, story didn't even come up, and it was a story-based game. And so I was like, well, a story here, well, I don't know, a story maybe up here? I'd want to put it up there. You know, and what I found was really interesting about this, though, is that it was like so easy for this person. It was very natural for them to just rank the importance of all of these things. And I think that's such a, you know, look, we're in a very difficult production environment. And so we all know what it's like when you have to scale back things, you have to make difficult decisions. You only have so much budget, you only have so much time. But I think a lot of this would go away if you just stop thinking about it this way and start to integrate it more holistically. Ideally, you can't cut out your story without impacting your fun and your gameplay and your art and your level design. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So I would argue more for an approach like this, where, yeah, at the center of it should be fun. We're making games. Games by their very nature, right? Should be fun, enjoyable, entertaining, whatever kind of synonym you want to use for that. But wrapped around that, I would say in most cases is story, particularly if you have a story-driven game. Again, Words with Friends, not so much. But if you're talking any of these next-gen kind of things, story should sort of encompass the fun. It should add to the fun. And all of your other disciplines should touch the story and be working towards the fun in a way that, hey, audio, design, UI, all those other things, even the ones that aren't up here, hey, they enhance your story. They enhance your fun. Okay? And your fun, story, and all those sort of things inform the way the other things work. Okay? It's got to be a much more holistic approach. This right here. Has anybody gone to this site yet? Anybody gone to overchargeddrink.com? All right, I am bringing it to you in the Nordic Game Conference. At overchargeddrink.com is something we've done for our marketing. And this is an area where you really need to integrate your story as well. So that's why I wanted to put this up here. It is a fiction site for Sunset Overdrive. We launched this a couple weeks ago, and what it is you scroll down, you see a bunch of other things. But Fizco is the company that has created this drink that is going to wreak a bunch of havoc and cause all the mayhem to go down in Sunset Overdrive. So we decided we wanted to make a product page. Sort of get in there, get into the narrative, sort of put it out with people. And the marketing people loved the fact that we came to them and were saying, hey, how can you help us grow this story? How can you help us push this out there? And the tone and everything, it's quite fun. I think you'll start to get a really good sense of the tone of the game if you go visit this site. For instance, you click on nutritional info. Who cares? It's awesome. You know, Fizzy is this person who's like, he's the Ronald McDonald of Fizco, I guess. You know, he's the spokes mascot. And he also plays a pretty big role in the game. So we're starting to seed this character, get it out there. And it was great that the marketing people were super excited to help us do that. But it was great because they brought a lot of the text, the ideas, the other stuff to us. And they made the site so much better than we would have if we were just sitting down with our art assets and our writers going, oh, how would we put this together? They gave us some really amazing input. And this was also a collaboration between Microsoft's creative team, Microsoft's marketing team, Insomniac's creative team, and Insomniac's sort of social media and PR group. They all came together and worked on this. And of course, then everybody grabbed their artists, grabbed whatever. So it's a fun project, I would say. Look at it, but it's a good example. This is another thing that we do to give people the opportunity to think about story, even if story isn't necessarily their first thing, or even if it is, and share other things. We have Game Club. And we do this about once a month. It's like book club, but better. And what we do is everybody who wants to come, anyone who has any interest in story, we invite people from all of the different disciplines. We invite producers, we invite artists, we invite designers, get together in a room after having played a particular game, and we discuss, hey, what about this was really awesome? What were some of the things that, you know, what were some of the things that you really responded to? Why did you respond to it? Okay, art person, what would you have done a little differently? This is an interesting game to have looked at with art person. What would you have done differently? Because one of the things I love about this game is the fact that, yeah, the art wasn't the focus of it, but in many ways that art told part of the story, and that was fun, even though it was so basic. How many people have played this? Is Mike here? I know that Mike was maybe going to be attending conference today. So, yeah, we, you know, Mike, there were like 30 people inside Microsoft who were talking about this game and how much we enjoyed the story. But this gave people a chance for, hey, your audio people started hearing what some of the narrative people were saying. Your narrative people were hearing what the audio people were saying, and they were all talking about it. But more importantly, they were thinking about narrative from the top, like from the beginning. They were thinking about it all holistically and starting to say, I am going to think about narrative while I'm playing this game. So you know what means that what's going to happen from that is when I'm working on this other game that I'm working on right now, I'm naturally going to start thinking more about narrative. It's going to soak in. I'd really recommend to people, it doesn't matter how big, small your company is, if you do it with a group of fellow students, whatever, it's a really great exercise to just start diving into, oh, story, how does this work? All right, and then finally, you know, once you've got the right team, once they are all there, yeah, you want to treat your people well because you're only going to get really good loyalty and productivity if you do that. It's also just the right thing to do, you know. There's enough people in this, you know, in various entertainment industries that will be not nice to people. So look out for each other, do those kind of things. All right, and don't forget this in success. When things get really big, it's a lot easier when you're making Brothers, when you're making Thomas Was Alone, when you're making some of the smaller games as well. It is, one of the great things is it is easier to have a creative vision holder, to push for something all in one direction, to keep the various pieces wrangled. When you start to get a 300, 400, 500 person team together making a game, it absolutely becomes harder. And you start to think of the people on your team a little bit more like cogs. Maybe some of you feel like a cog in one of those things. But, you know, we can change it from the ground up. All right, I think we have maybe just enough time to do this. And I'm sorry, I'm going to actually have to skip out to the web because the thing that my company sent me was actually corrupted. So I just wanted to show a little bit of this. It's great to work at Wish I worked with people who understood technology a little better. Let's see. Just want to show you this first. Oh no, what happened? It's not up there. I'm sorry, what was that? Because I'm looking at it here. It's awesome, by the way.
How you screen double your...
Oh, no. Okay, well, you know what? We're not going to be able to show it here. That's fine. Yeah, nah, let's not worry about it. So, sorry about that, folks. I was going to show you this awesome thing of... Oh. Nah, can you do that? I don't know. See, I work at Microsoft. I know nothing about technology. Don't worry about it. So, yeah, what I was going to just show you is a clip that actually all of you can see on YouTube, as I said. But, you know, it was Sam Lake sort of talking about some of the stuff that we're doing on Quantum Break. And what is really exciting about Quantum Break, I'm assuming most people here have heard of this project. It really is an interesting push on what you can do with interactive and linear media and how the two of them can work well together. And I will tell you, I have never, ever worked on a project that is more narratively complex than this. But the thing that gives me real confidence that we're going to pull off all the promises that we're making about the fact that the way you play the game impacts the show you see. And the show absolutely informs the way you should play the game. And there are going to be, you know, different endings. There's going to be an actual ownership of the story from the people who are playing it. The only way we can pull that off is because we've got really strong communication between all of our disciplines. You know? And Sam is really there at the helm of things, particularly on the game side and pushing stuff out. I'm working over on the TV side a lot of things and pushing to him, and we talk almost daily about the various things that are going on here. And I'm actually really excited about it, and I'm I'm confident that we're going to deliver on all the things that last E3 we said we were going to deliver on, because we've actually started to, everyone believes how important story is. We're talking with the artists. I talk with our designer daily about how we can create more of that story integration. So anyway, we need to wrap up, and I want to give you guys time for a little bit of questions. So summary, story has a lot of untapped potential, and it's the people that are going to actually realize that potential. And hey, you know what? You are people in the games industry. So be excellent, be collaborative, and let's do this. All right. And that's it. All right, if you guys have questions, I'm happy to do it. If you want to get in touch with me, probably the best way to do it, if you have questions later that you think of, probably just grab me on Twitter, then we can exchange information and be able to do anything that way. But are there questions anyone wants to ask on anything? Hello? If not, that's okay. But really, you don't have some story problem, you don't have some question about... Everything I said was crystal clear? All right. Fair enough. Oh, there's something up there.
Hello. Hello. I'm Mike, by the way. Thank you for mentioning my game. That's awesome. Yeah, no, my question was the product law site that you had, the energy drink thing.
Ah, yeah.
You mentioned you had like 4 departments working on that. How do you manage, or whatever, how do you manage to get something cohesive out of that at the other end?
Well, okay, when it comes down to the departments, everybody has really defined things that they do there. So in terms of actually interfacing with the production studio, that was all done through a group at Insomniac who does all of their publicity, their community management, all of that kind of thing. But so they were points on actually getting the production done. But they would send us the wireframes. They would send us all of the text, the information on a regular basis. And we had a weekly call that was standing, and then sometimes would have a second call whenever we needed it. Because, of course, the Microsoft folks are in Seattle, Insomniac folks are down in Los Angeles. And that's, a good 2.5-hour flight away from each other. So we'd had to do most of it by phone. But we would do also video conferences as we were doing a lot of the brainstorming at the beginning too, because there was some back and forth, and we knew we kind of wanted something about the corporate site, because the corporation is kind of a pretty key villain in this. And so we wanted to kind of start to seed that. But the way in which we did it, what was the focus? Is it just a corporate site like you would go to and be like, we talked about the fact, oh, could you have like jobs postings and all those other things that you would see on just a plain old corporate site? And we decided, no, the core of this game is really about this energy drink. You see it play out kind of at the beginning. You play with it throughout most of the game. It comes into play. And so all that process, though, was some back and forth. And sometimes we at Microsoft would our creative team would go back and forth and say, oh, we think it would be really cool to do this. And we'd type something up and we'd send it over to them. We'd set a call for the next day when they've had a chance to read it and go over it. Am I saying that's the most efficient way to do it? It would have been a lot more efficient if we were all in the same building. But the key to it was really communication and making sure that everyone had very clear things that they were in charge of. So at the end of the day, I had to sign off on all the text and content that was on there. Our marketing team was actually paying for it, so they had to deal with all the bills, and therefore they wanted to relate it to their spend. And there's also things on the site, as you scroll down, that mention other dates that might happen to coincide with E3 and Comic-Con and PAX and other stuff. They're not called out as that, but there's reasons that they're on there because it weaves into our marketing plan, and there will be new events that pop up at each one of those. And so that's really, it was just sheer force of will for communication.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. Down here. I don't know. Sure, go ahead, shout.
I'm going to whisper this, okay?
Excellent. Let's whisper.
Do you feel, just a little bit, bearing in mind, you know, we've got Journey, we've got Papa and Yo, we've got Gone Home, we've got Dear Esther. Do you feel, and don't take this the wrong way, but do you feel just a little bit that Microsoft is kind of playing catch up? I mean, and that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, but it's a good thing to be kind of really transparent about it, because I think you might find that, you know, especially addressing a Nordic community who've done a lot of experimentation in story and done some really amazing work. And, you know, I think there's probably a, let's call it a dialogic relationship that you might have with this particular community. I mean, I'd just like you to sort of react to that. You can insult me as well if you want.
No, I don't. Look, I think, let me say that I was hired a couple years ago by Microsoft, and they made a big investment in narrative because I think they realized that it was a really important thing to be doing, and they could be doing it better. And I think this also relates to the things I was saying before. When you do have what is a smaller team, you actually have a lot more ability to innovate. And so I think as we're talking about the community and the collective and how we have to all move this forward together, many of those innovations are actually really going to come out of the indie game community or out of much smaller productions. You know, the ones I was citing as things that I thought were interesting weren't really, you know, AAA games. They weren't, you know, I think what we're doing with Quantum Break is cool, and what we're doing with Quantum Break can only be done with that kind of budget. So it's a chance for that game to do that. Is it going to be across the board the most innovative story? No, it's one type of innovation that will build on another type of innovation that will build on another type of innovation. And so, yeah, I personally think that I don't even think I'm saying anything.
You can say
well,
yes.
But I feel like indie games make much more innovation across the board. I feel like, yeah, when it comes to doing high-end graphics, when you get your super high frame rates and download speeds and all that kind of stuff, yeah, that takes some of those big engines. But the stuff when it comes to real creative innovation, it's rarely in AAA. You know, and so that's why when we have Game Club, we don't tend to look at AAA games. We look at other stuff to learn from it because we recognize we need to learn from smaller things. We need to learn from different communities other than just US-centric communities. Because, yeah, we certainly don't have it all figured out, but, you know, I'm trying to think if I can at least recognize that we might have a chance to start catching up and do better things. Yeah.
Thanks.
So I'm wondering if you guys are getting into virtual reality games and storytelling, because I'm really interested. So I would like to know, what do you have?
I think Microsoft is always looking at new technologies and the way to tell stories. That's the thing I love most about my job, probably, is the fact that you get to see new technologies that are coming up and ways that that's there and blend them with, you know, with story and try and find the best story to show what that technology can do and have technology allow you to tell better stories. So they're always looking at new platforms. You know, I'm personally not working on anything in that virtual reality space. You know, I wouldn't say that no one is there. I don't, you know, that's not, they can be siloed too in a lot of ways. You know, there's a lot of like, oh yeah, I don't know necessarily what's going on the floor beneath me or above me. So it, I think, would absolutely be something that I could see Microsoft getting into because so many other people are. So. Absolutely, and to me, sorry, the question, in case you couldn't hear, the question was really about virtual reality and storytelling, and I think the big challenge in virtual reality / storytelling, and this is kind of a challenge anytime you're working with a new technology and telling story, is telling a story that doesn't feel gimmicky. You know, doesn't feel like something that you're just trying to show off, ooh, look what we can do, fancy dancy, you know, it's, because that's, I think, the place where people go, oh, it can do this, so let's show it off, rather than having it be integral and woven into the story. And the way we were kind of talking about, your whole experience should really be as woven together. And so just like the game stuff though, I suspect that the solution to that in virtual reality is going to be all the various people have to be contributing to the story. It is a good challenge, yeah. It's exciting though. I mean, it's super exciting to see what we can do with all these new things, you know, and then we reset our curve and say, what are we doing now at the beginning of virtual reality for storytelling? It's an interesting one. Anything else? All right, anyway, I guess we're out of time. Thank you guys so much.